So today I want to discuss the question of whether procreation should be legally prohibited. So let's assume for the sake of this discussion that having children is in fact morally wrong. Now some people might think if this is the case, if something is morally wrong, it should be outlawed. And so rape, for example, I think we can agree is morally wrong, and the law more or less agrees with this. But the question is, are there actions which we recognize to be wrong ethically, but which we nevertheless would not be in favor of outlawing? And I think that there are, and the reason for this is that although unethical behavior, of course, has undesirable consequences, criminalizing some act or behavior very often has its own set of consequences, which also need to be considered. So, for instance, is it morally wrong to publicly promote racism? Yes, I think it is morally wrong. Should this sort of behavior, should these activities be illegal? And notice that this question raises a different set of considerations because although publicly encouraging racist attitudes is, I would argue, ethically indefensible, to outlaw it would require that we infringe upon people's freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And by censoring one group of people in this way, we effectively undermine the principle of free speech altogether, or so it seems to me. And so in this case, we're dealing with a situation in which rights or values come into conflict. And so what one might say in this case is that what these people are doing is morally unjustified, but that they nevertheless should not be legally required to refrain from it. And it might even be the case that allowing people to express their beliefs in this way provides important opportunities for people to publicly respond to such ideas, which can help expose any weakness in the arguments that are thought to ground such views. Now, I think the idea of outlawing procreation is similar in that it raises a number of practical concerns. For instance, if it were illegal to have children, people would obviously need to, if they want to avoid penalties, conceal their pregnancy from the state. And one effect of this might be an increase in women who carry out their pregnancy without any professional support or assistance, potentially putting women at higher risk of pregnancy-related health problems and even death. Another possible consequence of this is that parents may be more likely to hide or abandon children after they're born. In fact, we've observed exactly this sort of effect with respect to actual policies of this kind. And so these are certainly real concerns which need to be weighed and considered. And it therefore seems to me that antinatalists are not logically committed to favoring legal measures of this kind. Now, of course, one could argue that assuming that such legal measures would significantly reduce instances of birth, that all of this prevented harm would outweigh all the harms that may result from such policies. And so I'm not saying we should categorically oppose such measures, only that they do not necessarily follow from antinatalism. It's important to say also that one could propose other kinds of approaches, policies or incentives to reduce the number of individuals born that maybe avoid the problems I mentioned and which can minimize expected harms. But in any case, the central point I want to stress here is that there's often an important distinction between morality and law. And I think in our case, one can certainly maintain without any obvious contradiction that having children is wrong. It's morally wrong, but that it ought to nevertheless remain legal. These views are, seems to me, compatible. So that is all for now, and thanks again for listening.